All right, joining us today on Pirate Radio Live, James Plowright, Hornets and NBA draft analyst. James, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Jarrett. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for coming on the show. Uh, Talking about the Hornets really just is in the summer. Once the season starts, that's kind of the end for the Hornets season, at least for the last 9 years. How long have you been covering the Hornets?
Wow, covering the Hornets. I believe the first year was 2009. I was 16 years old, and I was in school, and I won a blogging competition for Bobcats.com, where I was a fan blogger, an international fan blogger. People might notice I'm in Manchester, UK. And from then, I've been writing and podcasting about the Bobcats and Hornets one way or another now. So, yeah, I've been in here for the long haul.
Yeah, being in there for the long haul not always a good thing, but at least you got to see 2016, right?
Absolutely. Got to see Kemba Walker making a run with that team, Al Jefferson having his moment, third team All NBA. It's the peak of the last 20 years of Charlotte basketball, which isn't great. But at least it happened. At least it wasn't none of that either.
Yeah. We'll go ahead and get into what's going on right now. So the lottery being last week, Hornets, I thought once they got into that top four, there was a good shot to get that number one pick, but unfortunately they get the fourth pick. What were your thoughts on the lottery and the Mavericks moving all the way up to first?
I wish it had just been one of the bad teams. Even like Utah, Washington, New Orleans, Charlotte, just let one of those teams rather than the Mavericks who have backed their way into a generational prospect, the Spurs who've moved up for the third year in a row, Philly who moved up again, not just holding on to their pick. The new flattened lottery odds, and for your listeners who might not know, they changed the weighting system towards odds about 4 or 5 years ago now, after I think Philly during the process era basically got the first overall pick a bunch of times in a row. They changed it, and I think that was a mistake. Now there is really difficult for bad teams to get out of that cycle when they're having to pick fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh every year, and it's what's happening, which is a real shame. But look, it could have been a lot worse. If they had not stayed at four, they would have been all the way down at like 6 or 7. So at least they're not in Washington and Utah's position. It's kind of the best of a bad outcome.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. So what players are you looking at specifically for that four spot with the Hornets?
I think it really comes down to a group of 4 players, and I would be stunned if it wasn't one of these 4 players. Now, Jeff Peterson and the Hornets do stun fans, just like drafting T. John Salon last year. So maybe I shouldn't be so confident. But Ace Bailey, VJ Edgecombe, Trey Johnson, Connor Knuppel. I think most might even not have Con in that group. It might be between those three. I have Con quite highly. I really like Con Knuppel. And there is some Duke ties between the organization now with co-owner Rick Schnall, who is a big Duke booster and has been involved with that organization for a number of years. So I wouldn't rule out Con at the moment, but I think it's one of those 4 guys, and all bring shooting and scoring. VJ and Ace bring a level of defense, which I think this team needs as well. So I think all guys will tick certain boxes, if not also caving into some of the weaknesses already on this team, like Trey Johnson, Ace Bailey, a lot of jump shots, struggle to get to the rim, not very physical, skinny, which is kind of the same issue LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller have, and Mark Williams. So, at some point, the Hornets need to probably get some more well-rounded depth in this roster. But the truth is, do you take much into account for a team that's won as few games as the Hornets have the last few years? I just don't know if all those guys are going to be here in the long term. Outside of Brandon Miller, it wouldn't shock me if every other player was not on this team in 2 years.
Wow. Okay, so I was going to wait to ask this question later, but who do you see in that starting five, or just the names you mentioned, Brandon Miller, Miles Bridges, LaMelo, and Mark Williams? Who do you see them kind of moving away from this offseason, if anybody?
I think Mark Williams got to be at the top of the list, considering they already tried to trade him once last season, and he's coming up for a new contract. He'll be eligible for a rookie extension. from the end of the season until October. I wouldn't expect that to get done. He would then be a free agent, a restricted free agent next year, and he's going to want north of 20 million per year. And his health track record and like his defensive impacts, I think it's a dangerous contract for anyone to sign. So I think he's the guy top of the list, most likely to be traded. I would say next is probably Josh Green, just because I think he's quite movable and he's like had a ho hum year this year. And I think next is actually I would probably have LaMelo Ball ahead of Miles Bridges, and that's not because I think Miles Bridges is more difficult to move because of some of the off the court stuff. But I think LaMelo Ball, I'm probably a little bit out on a limb on this. I think I would lean into exploring the trade market for LaMelo Ball this offseason, more so than I think like the most of the Hornets analysts and national media are probably used to. I just think this team could be looking for a fresh start, new ownership group, new front office. And I'm not sold that LaMelo Ball ticks all the boxes of what they look for in a player.
Yeah, and I've kind of been on this early on in the season. I think now, if you're going to just hit the reset button and blow it up, now would be the best time to trade LaMelo, just because I don't think his value is going up from here. I think right now is where you could get the most valuable picks. So you think they explore that option this offseason? What teams do you think would be in on a guy like LaMelo Ball?
It's possible they explore it. It's also really risky because you make it public, then like all of a sudden, like, LaMelo's been nothing but a great like citizen for the Hornets. Like never talked about being traded once, never complained. And if you like turn around and stab that guy in the back and be like, "Hey, we're shopping you," that could send that relationship really south and then leave you in a position where you kind of have to trade him, which is dangerous. So that line between like getting back your the best value by letting everyone know he's available, but hoping the player doesn't get annoyed the fact that you're doing it, you would have to probably have some conversations with this camp. I mean, like, I think if he played next year and stayed healthy, I think his value would go up. But if he plays next year and gets injured again, then I think people would view him as like borderline untradeable. So he's kind of like in this, like his stock could boom or bust anyway. Whereas right now, at least he played whatever it was, 50 odd games this year, which is better than the previous 2 years. But I think there's a few teams out there. I think the Kings are in the market for a point guard. The Dallas Mavericks, ironically, are now in the market for a point guard. The Orlando Magic are another team that stand out. Houston Rockets, although I don't love that fit there. But there's probably like 5 to 8 teams who you could talk themselves into, I think, like, hey, we need a playmaker, an outside shooter, someone who can play off our star, and LaMelo could be that guy.
Yeah, going back to the draft, VJ Edgecombe is a guy I really like it for. What are his pros and cons coming out this year?
Yeah, he's a really interesting prospect from the Bahamas originally, played at Baylor this year, and actually played for the Bahamas national team in the FIBA qualifiers last summer. So he's like playing alongside NBA players, Buddy Hield, DeAndre Ayton, Eric Gordon, and like played well, like looked like an NBA player playing alongside those guys. He is he's like a good catch and shoot player. So like spotting up from the outside, he's a good shooter. He just can't really do it off the dribble right now. So if you're looking for him to kind of like, hey, go get you a bucket and you dribble step backs, pull-ups, he's not going to do that, but he's going to space the floor for you. But then he combines that with freakish athleticism. We're talking like Ja Morant athleticism, ability to rise up for blocks, dunks, incredible athlete. And he has, just absolute trampolines in his knees. It's crazy. And that really shows up on the defensive end, especially. Where he's able to be really aggressive, switch on to guys, guard people who are bigger than him, things of that nature. So he's a really versatile defensive Swiss Army knife. And then on the other side, like I said, he's a decent shooter, an okay distributor, and if he gets out in transition, he's a real threat. Going coast to coast with the ball because of that speed and that athleticism. But he's just all the reporting is great all-round kid, like super incredible work ethic. Plays really hard, has a really good motor, will be diving on the floor, will never give up on any play. And I think that's the kind of thing that I think this Hornets front office really are prioritizing. And I expect him probably to be at the top of their draft board, if you were to say right now.
All right, nice. So the Hornets got 2 picks in the early second round, 33 and 34. What guys are you looking at for those 2 spots?
Yeah, difficult to project right now because the withdrawal deadline for NCAA and international players is coming up. So, like, we don't know quite how much depth this draft is going to have. I think Drake Powell's an interesting name and someone who a lot of your listeners will probably know playing at UNC this year. He is all D, no offense basically right now. Like, shot the ball okay. He had a really good draft combine. Like, had some of the best athletic testing. Had a really good wingspan, and he could be a lockdown defender who can hit open spot ups, which could be something that you see versatility like that being something that is really useful when you get to the playoffs. So I think he's a name to consider. I think Hugo Gonzalez is another guy from Real Madrid, Spanish guy, probably been one of the top European prospects for years, but has ended up playing for Real Madrid, who are one of the best teams in Europe. And what that means is he doesn't play that much. He plays essentially garbage time at the end of games. So it's hard to get a real feel on him, but he's kind of dropped because scouts haven't seen a lot of him play because he's buried on the bench. But through all the FIBA youth events, he's been people thought he'd be a lottery pick this year. So I think there's some upside there. And he's an athletic wing who can pass a little bit, shoot a little bit, kind of jack of all trades, but big and strong, athletic, something you don't always expect from the European wings. But I think he's another guy who could potentially be interesting for Charlotte in that early second round too.
James Plowright joining us today. You mentioned big and strong. The Hornets desperately need a big man, and that Nick Richards trade, they kind of got a good return. I didn't really understand it at the time, and still don't really today, because after that, the only big guy we had was Taj Gibson, really. So how aggressive do you expect them to be going after a big man in the draft and free agency and potential trades this offseason?
Well, I think it depends on the Mark Williams trade. If they trade Mark Williams, they will definitely need to add someone. But after that Nick Richards trade, they made the separate move with Cody Martin and Vasimicic to bring in Yusuf Nurkic. So right now, they've actually got a pretty deep front court with Mark Williams, starting center, Nurkic as a backup, and Moussa Diabate, who was one of the kind of very few positive storylines this year, who kind of emerged into a legit rotation player. And they all bring a little bit something different, which is interesting. Look, if you're wanting the Hornets to be in the playoffs, that isn't good enough, that group. But I don't think that's the goal for this next season here. I think the goal is another rebuilding year, get another probably high pick in a very stacked 2026 draft, and probably move from there. I really think this new Hornets ownership group is taking a long-term approach with this. They're waiting for that new practice facility to be built, waiting for the arena renovations to be done, and they're kind of viewing 2027 as the year of okay, we're really going to jump onto the NBA stage as a competitive franchise. And unfortunately, that means some pain between now and then, which a lot of Hornets fans will probably be pretty numb to that at some point if there are any left.
Yeah, 9 years without a playoff appearance. But I thought about this yesterday. We're really only in year 2 of this new regime, so as impatient as the fans are, they're probably going to have to sit around and wait for a little bit. But just you mentioned a long-term approach. Just what is the outlook of this franchise for the short term? I guess just rebuilding.
Yes, to be frank, I think that's exactly what they're looking to do. I don't expect them to go and sign someone in free agency this summer for big money. I don't expect a big splashy trade. I expect more trades similar to last offseason, where it's hey, we take your bad salary and we get draft picks for it and things of that nature. And with so many teams struggling with this new CBA and the second apron and the taxes and all these things, Charlotte are one of the few teams who aren't that motivated to win, I don't believe, and are probably willing to take on some of that bad money in return for future picks. And I think it's the right strategy. I'll say, I know it's difficult when you're watching 82 games of it, but the Hornets don't have enough talent right now to start just trying to trade for guys and adding free agents. They'd be capped out, they'd be out of draft picks, and they'd probably be a 10th and 9th seed. And I think we've seen that mistake happen too many times in the past. And I think finally, it's the first time really, I think this franchise has rebuilt the proper way. It's not just been 1 year of being bad and then trying to compete again. It's been a continual strategy over the last couple of years now. And I think they're in a good position, like long term, with more picks than ever, future picks to make moves. But the short term, I'm not promising anything much better. But as people could just stay healthy, I think people would just take that as a win right now. If they could just see Brandon Miller, LaMelo Ball, Mark Williams, Mal Bridges all on the floor together, like that would bring happiness, I think, to a lot of people, even if they weren't that good. So maybe that could be an aim for a short-term goal next year.
Yeah, and something that's really made me optimistic this season is seeing what the Pistons were able to do. Just because you look at what the Rockets did in the West, like they had picks because of the James Harden trade, but Detroit, they just really built that from the ground up and were in the playoffs this year.
They did, and Trajan Langdon, who's their new GM, he interviewed for the Hornets position that Jeff Peterson eventually got. He was one of the finalists, and he went in there and they added veterans via free agency: Tobias Harris, Malik Beasley. Like these are guys who they brought in, and that kind of helped kind of like complement their ascent. But they had been drafting in the top 5 for the 4 years before that. And as bad as it feels right now, this is actually like the Hornets only their 3rd year of being like in the top of the draft lottery. Before that, they were in those playing for those 2 years. So I still think, like I say, the Hornets are just a year or two behind, I think, where Detroit are right now.
Nice. That's something that's at least good for Hornets fans right now. But you mentioned over when we were DMing on Twitter, you were able to watch a little ECU film, not to scout any of the guys on our side, but you were looking at who we were playing. Who were you looking out at right there?
Yeah, unfortunately not. Yaxel Lenenberg, he played for UAB. He had probably like the single best game of any draft prospect this year against East Carolina. 30 points, 20 rebounds, 8 assists, 5 steals, 4 blocks in 40 minutes. Like just an incredible stat line if you've ever seen it. And like that's just a must-watch game. And they don't know if he's going to stay in the draft or maybe he's transferred to Michigan. So he might go back to school. Like he's borderline. If he does stay in, he's probably one of my like favorite targets for the Hornets at 33 and 34 in that early second round. But again, like if he's going in that range, then I think he probably goes back to school. I think he wants like a first round top 20, top 25 pick guarantee. But yeah, I was watching it for Yaxel, not East Carolina, who were unfortunately on the other side of quite a drubbing in that game. But they did get them earlier in the season, I noticed. So you got them once.
I think that was the conference tournament game you were watching because I remember watching that. It's like we just have no shot if this guy's going to play like that. But I know you haven't looked at really anything with R.J. Felton, but just from what you're reading, what you're hearing, do you think he has a shot to get drafted?
I'd be pretty surprised. I hate to be negative for your listeners, but the Chicago Draft Combine is normally a good litmus test for like where teams view players in terms of draft stock. And RJ Felton wasn't one of the Chicago Combine invitees. I don't know if he got an invite to the G League Elite Camp. I don't know if you know that. But if he didn't get invited to that either, then I think it's a really low chance because normally like 1, 2, 3 guys get invites from the G League Elite Camp. That's like the kind of combine below Chicago. So if he didn't get invited to that either, then I would say it looks pretty unlikely. But would still probably land on an NBA team somewhere as like an undrafted free agent, play summer league, maybe get an Exhibit 10 contract where like a team has his rights and they play for the G League team. That's fairly common these days. So and Charlotte for a while had a pretty good track record. Like Jalen Sims was someone he went to, I think, UNC Charlotte or UNC Wilmington, one of the smallest schools in the state. And he ended up playing with Greensboro and just became their like highest scorer of all time this year for the Greensboro Swarm. So there are routes, I think, for some of like the guys who aren't getting draft analysts to be drafted still to land with the team. And Jalen Sims even got a call up to the Hornets towards the end of the season too. So there's definitely hope there.
Good to hear for our boy R.J. Felton. James, one more question before I let you go. You've covered the Hornets since 2009. Who's the Mount Rushmore of your Hornets/Bobcats players you've seen?
Kemba Walker has to be up there. This is a funny one, and people won't get it, but Adam Morrison will be up there because if it wasn't for Adam Morrison, then I would not cover the Charlotte Bobcats. It's a whole origin story of how I got into following the team. So he has to be there just for kind of the reason he was there. I'd have Bismack Biyombo up there again. Again, just like one of the all-time most loved people with the Charlotte Hornets, and then probably like Gerald Wallace as well, because he was like the first big star of the Charlotte Hornets. Early in his career as well. So maybe not your prototypical Mount Rushmore, but one that is personal to me.
Yeah, not really a lot to choose from, but Gerald Wallace, Kemba Walker, Bismack, definitely agree with you there. I would probably put Al Jefferson in mine. But James, thanks for joining us today. Let the people know where they can follow you and catch all your stuff.
Yeah, if you want to follow me, you can find me on X at British_Buzz. But then I also write and do podcast work for the Buzzbeat podcast. We cover the Charlotte Hornets in like quite a bit of depth. So if you want to get deeper into that, you go there. And then I also write for Charlotte Culture as well, kind of do like big picture Hornets stuff for them. So yeah, Charlotte Culture, Buzzbeat podcast on an X. That's where you can find my stuff. Thanks for having me on.
Great follow on X. I've just been keeping up with you the last couple weeks, and I've learned a lot about a lot of these prospects coming out in this year's draft. So excited to keep following your work, and thanks for joining us today.
Anytime.